The sound of shattering glass echoed through the Gangnam Izakaya like a gunshot. Then came the child's stifled cry, small, terrified, swallowed by the ambient noise of clinking champagne flutes and muted laughter. In Seoul, you either have a name that opens doors or you are invisible. Mercy was the latter, a ghost in a burgundy apron, moving between tables with her eyes down and her past buried deep. She didn't know the boy sitting alone at table 12, dressed in a miniature charcoal suit that cost more than her year's rent, was Haru Machi, the untouchable son of the Tiger of Ginza. She didn't know the man watching from the darkened VIP balcony, motionless as carved stone, was Hisayuki Machi, a kingpin who hadn't felt fear since the day he stopped counting bodies. When the drunk politician, red-faced, stumbling, reeking of imported whiskey, grabbed the boy's collar and raised his hand to strike, Mercy didn't think. She moved. That single, split-second decision would ignite a war, burn down an empire's facade, and force the most dangerous man in Asia to his knees. This is the story of how a waitress saved a wolf cub and found herself claimed by the pack. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the bake-do room, a sound that usually soothed Mercy during her 12-hour shifts. Tonight, it sounded like static, white noise that matched the buzzing dread coiling in her chest. Being a server at one of Gangnam's most exclusive establishments meant invisibility was survival. You poured soju, cleared plates, bowed at precise angles, and never, ever made eye contact unless spoken to first. Mercy adjusted her apron, her braided hair pulled back so tight it made her temples ache. The dining floor was unusually tense for a Thursday. A former minister was in booth 9. A chaebol heir was negotiating a hostile takeover in hushed tones near the bar. But Mercy's eyes kept drifting to table 12. Sitting there, completely alone, was a boy. He couldn't have been older than 8. He wore a 3-piece suit in charcoal gray, perfectly tailored but stiff, like armor. His dark hair was combed back with adult precision, and his small legs dangled from the velvet chair, not quite reaching the floor. In front of him sat an untouched plate of food and a sketchbook he wasn't drawing in. He was staring at the door, his small hands gripping a mechanical pencil so hard his knuckles had gone white. "Stop staring, Mercy," hissed Manager Choi, snapping his fingers in front of her face. His breath smelled like cigarettes and impatience. "Table 12 pays more for privacy than you'll make in 10 years. Refill his water. Do not speak." Mercy nodded, swallowing her questions. She grabbed the crystal pitcher and approached carefully. As she poured, the boy flinched, a full-body recoil as if expecting a blow. "It's okay," she whispered in Korean, breaking protocol. "Just water. Are you hungry?" The boy looked up. His eyes were dark, impossibly old for a child, and filled with a trembling, unspoken terror. He shook his head once, barely perceptible. "Hey, you!" The roar tore through the restaurant like a thunderclap, silencing every conversation. Mercy froze. A man staggered out from the private bar, Assemblyman Park, notorious for gambling debts and public scandals. He was swaying, his face flushed a violent crimson, his designer shirt half untucked. "Where's my damn drink?" Park bellowed, knocking into a server and sending a tray crashing. His unfocused eyes swept the room, then locked onto table 12. "And why the hell is there a kid sitting here alone? This is a men's club, not a daycare." Manager Choi was nowhere to be seen. Security was across the room, distracted by the minister's entourage. Park stumbled forward, each step heavier than the last. "You think you're special, boy?" Park slurred, pointing a thick finger at Haru. "Sitting there like some little prince while real men do business?" Haru shrank back into his chair, the pencil snapping between his small fingers. "Sir, please," Mercy said, stepping between the table and the drunk politician. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. "He's just a child. Please return to your seat." Park looked at Mercy like she was dirt on his shoe. His lip curled. "Move, girl. I'm going to teach this brat some respect. Looking at me like that, who does he think he is?" Park lunged. It wasn't calculated, just a drunken, violent shove meant to flip the table and terrify the boy. But he was a large man, over 6 feet and 200 pounds, and his momentum was deadly. Mercy didn't hesitate. Her body remembered what her mind had tried to forget. She sidestepped, redirected his weight with a sharp twist of his wrist, and drove her palm into his solar plexus. Precisely, efficiently, without mercy. Park gasped, the air exploding from his lungs, and crumpled to the polished floor like a felled tree. The restaurant went silent, and from the shadows of the VIP balcony, Hisayuki Machi leaned forward and smiled. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I'd love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going. The moment Assemblyman Park's body collapsed onto the marble floor, time seemed to crystallize. The wet gasp of air leaving his lungs, the dull thud of expensive fabric meeting stone, the tinkling scatter of ice cubes from his abandoned glass, each sound existed in its own separate pocket of reality. Mercy stood frozen in her defensive stance, her breathing controlled despite the chaos erupting inside her chest. Around her, the Baekdu room had transformed into a gallery of shocked faces, every patron suspended mid-motion like figures in a painting. Park lay curled on his side, wheezing and clutching his chest, his carefully maintained image shattered as completely as the crystal scattered around him. His face cycled through shades of red and purple as he struggled to remember how breathing worked. Servers had backed away instinctively, creating a ring of empty space around the fallen assemblyman, as if violence itself were contagious. Mercy's gaze dropped immediately to Haru. The boy remained pressed against the back of his chair, eyes wide and unblinking, but something had shifted in his expression. The terror was still there, but underneath it flickered something else. A spark of recognition, perhaps, or the faintest shadow of relief. "Are you hurt?" Mercy asked softly in Korean, her voice barely audible above the renewed murmur of conversation rippling through the restaurant. Haru shook his head slowly, his small fingers still gripping the broken pencil. The spell broke when Manager Choi came rushing across the dining floor, his polished shoes clicking against marble with military precision. His face had gone an unhealthy shade of crimson, a vein pulsing visibly at his temple. He stopped just short of Mercy, close enough that she could smell the coffee and cologne that clung to his impeccable suit. "What have you done?" The words came out as a hiss, low and venomous. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Mercy straightened, but didn't step back. He was going to hurt. "He is Assemblyman Park." Choi's voice rose despite his obvious effort at control. "A government official, and you, a server, dared to lay hands on him." His laugh was sharp and humorless. "You've destroyed yourself. You understand that, don't you? You've thrown away everything over." He gestured dismissively toward Haru without looking at the boy. "Over nothing." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples of realization through Mercy's consciousness. Of course, there would be consequences. In Seoul's carefully calibrated hierarchy, she had just committed an unforgivable transgression. Servers didn't defend. They didn't intervene. They certainly didn't put their hands on members of the National Assembly, no matter how justified the action. "I protected a child," Mercy said quietly, but her voice carried an edge that surprised even her. "That's not nothing." Choi's expression twisted into something ugly and satisfied. "You're fired. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out through the kitchen. And if you're very, very fortunate, that's where this ends. If Assemblyman Park decides to press charges..." He shrugged, the gesture loaded with false sympathy. "Well, I hope you have a good lawyer. You'll need one." Mercy felt the walls closing in, the familiar suffocation of powerlessness that had defined so much of her life in Seoul. She'd worked at the Baekdu room for 18 months, endured countless indignities, swallowed her voice and her pride to maintain this precarious foothold in a city that had never wanted her. And now it was gone. All of it. Because she'd chosen instinct over survival. She was opening her mouth to respond, though what she could possibly say she didn't know, when a voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. "Stop." The single word wasn't loud, but it carried a quality that made volume irrelevant. Absolute authority wrapped in conversational calm, the sound of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. Every head in the restaurant turned toward the source. Hisayuki Machi emerged from the private elevator that served the VIP suites, his bodyguards flanking him like shadows. He moved with unhurried precision, each step measured and deliberate. His charcoal suit was so perfectly tailored, it seemed to be part of him, rather than merely clothing. His dark hair was swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble, all sharp angles and controlled expression. But it was his eyes that commanded attention. Cold, assessing, missing nothing. The restaurant's ambient noise died completely. Even Assemblyman Park stopped his wheezing protests, his face going pale as he recognized who had entered the scene. Manager Choi's entire demeanor transformed in an instant. His spine straightened, his shoulders pulled back, and his voice dropped to a tone of obsequious respect. Mr. Machi, sir, I apologize for this disturbance. The situation is being handled. Is it? Hisayuki's gaze swept the room with clinical detachment before settling on Manager Choi. Tell me what happened. Choi's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. A server assaulted Assemblyman Park. Completely unprovoked. She will be removed immediately, and... I asked what happened, Hisayuki repeated, his tone unchanged but somehow heavier. Not what you've decided happened. The manager's mouth opened and closed uselessly. Into the silence, a small voice spoke. She saved me. Every eye turned to Haru, who remained in his chair but had straightened slightly, his hands now folded in his lap around the broken pencil. His voice was thin and uncertain, but clear. The man was going to hit me. Haru continued, his gaze fixed on his father. She stopped him. Hisayuki's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air around him. A subtle recalibration of tension. He looked at Mercy for the first time, and she felt the weight of that gaze like a physical thing. He wasn't just looking at her face. He was reading her stance, her breathing, the way she held herself even now when everything had fallen apart. His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Those aren't the eyes of a waitress, he thought. Those are the eyes of someone trained for combat, someone who knows how to protect. How much? Hisayuki asked, turning back to Manager Choi. The manager blinked, confused. Sir, how much for this establishment? The building, the business, the name. I'll wire the funds tonight. Choi's face went blank with shock. Mr. Machi, the Baekdu room isn't for sale. It's been in the current owner's family for... Everything has a price. Hisayuki's voice remained conversational. Name it. I don't have the authority to. Choi stammered, sweat beginning to bead at his hairline. Hisayuki pulled a phone from his inner jacket pocket with practiced ease. He tapped the screen twice, then held it to his ear. Mr. Kang? Hisayuki Machi, I'm interested in purchasing the Baekdu room. Tonight, a pause. Yes, the entire property. Another pause, longer this time. Excellent. My people will contact yours within the hour. He ended the call and returned the phone to his pocket, all in one fluid motion. The silence in the restaurant was absolute. Hisayuki turned to Mercy. You're terminated, I understand. Mercy nodded slowly, not trusting her voice. Good, Hisayuki said. You don't work for him anymore. He gestured vaguely toward the paralyzed Manager Choi. You work for me now. Specifically, you work for the future of my house. His gaze shifted to Haru, and for a fraction of a second, something almost human flickered in those cold eyes. My son requires a guardian, someone who acts on instinct rather than calculation, someone who values his safety over their own. I'm not. Mercy started, but Hisayuki raised a hand. This isn't a negotiation. Kenji. One of the bodyguards stepped forward. Take Miss... He looked at Mercy expectantly. Mercy, she said quietly. Take Miss Mercy and my son to the car. We're going home. Sir, I can't just... Mercy's protest died when she saw Haru sliding down from his chair, his small hand reaching toward her. The boy's eyes held a desperate hope that pierced through her confusion and fear. Please, Haru whispered, come with us. And because a child was asking, because that small voice carried more weight than all the logic screaming in her head, Mercy nodded. Kenji gestured toward the elevator, and she found herself moving, Haru's hand slipping into hers with surprising trust. Behind them, she heard Hisayuki speaking to someone else, his voice carrying the casual authority of a man rearranging the world to suit his preferences. The elevator ride was silent, except for the mechanical hum of ascent. Kenji stood at attention, his expression carefully neutral. Haru pressed against Mercy's side, his small body trembling slightly. She wanted to say something reassuring, but what reassurance could she possibly offer when she had no idea what was happening? The underground parking garage was all concrete and shadows, lit by harsh fluorescent strips. A black sedan waited with engine running, so pristine it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Kenji opened the rear door, and Haru climbed in without hesitation. Mercy followed, her movements feeling detached from her consciousness, as if she were watching someone else make these decisions. Haru settled into the leather seat and immediately reached for a seatbelt, his small fingers struggling with the mechanism. Without thinking, Mercy leaned over to help, clicking the belt into place. The boy looked up at her with those impossibly old eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Minutes later, Hisayuki slid into the seat beside her, bringing with him the scent of expensive cologne and something sharper, control, perhaps, or certainty. He didn't look at her, instead pulling out his phone and typing with swift precision. The car pulled smoothly into Seoul's neon-lit night. Mercy watched the city blur past the tinted windows, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. Somewhere in the past 20 minutes, her entire life had been dismantled and rebuilt according to someone else's design. She should be terrified. She should be demanding answers, insisting on being let out at the next light. But Haru's small hand had found hers again in the darkness of the back seat, and she couldn't bring herself to pull away. The drive took 40 minutes, winding up into the mountains north of Seoul, where the city's glow faded into darkness, punctuated only by distant lights. The car turned onto a private road, marked by a gate that opened automatically, its security cameras tracking their approach. The road curved upward through carefully maintained forest, and then the estate revealed itself. It wasn't what Mercy expected. Instead of traditional architecture or ostentatious display, the compound was aggressively modern, all clean lines and dark stone, built into the mountainside as if it had grown there. Walls surrounded the property, though they were disguised as natural rock formations. Lights glowed from strategic points, illuminating paths and entrances without compromising the structure's severity. The car stopped beneath a covered entrance. Kenji opened the door, and Haru climbed out with practiced ease. Mercy followed more slowly, her legs unsteady after the drive and the shock. The night air was cooler here, carrying the scent of pine and mountain rain. Hisayuki led them through a doorway that opened at his approach, into a vast entrance hall that managed to feel both spacious and suffocating. Everything was expensive: the polished floors, the minimal furniture, the art that adorned the walls, but nothing felt warm. It was a fortress dressed as a home. An elderly woman appeared from a side corridor, her silver hair pulled into a neat bun. She wore a simple gray dress that suggested staff, but the way Hisayuki nodded to her indicated respect. "Mrs. Sato," he said, "this is Mercy. She'll be staying with us. Please prepare the guest suite in the east wing." Mrs. Sato's eyes assessed Mercy with surprising warmth. "Of course, sir. Welcome, Miss Mercy." Her accent carried Japanese inflections, and her smile seemed genuine despite the strangeness of the situation. Haru had moved to stand beside a floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the valley below, his small silhouette dark against the glass. Hisayuki watched him for a moment, something complicated passing over his features, then turned to Mercy. "Tomorrow, we'll discuss specifics. Tonight, rest. Mrs. Sato will show you to your room." He started to walk away, then paused. "Thank you for protecting my son. Not many people would have done what you did." Before Mercy could respond, he was gone, disappearing into the shadowed corridors of his fortress. Mrs. Sato touched Mercy's arm gently. "Come, dear, you must be exhausted." But Mercy's attention was on Haru, still standing alone at the window. "What about him?" Mrs. Sato's expression softened with sadness. "He prefers to be alone most evenings. Since his mother passed 6 months ago, he struggles with bedtime." Something in Mercy's chest tightened. She crossed the hall to stand beside the boy, careful not to crowd him. For a long moment, they stood in silence, looking out at the lights of Seoul far below. "It's pretty," Mercy said softly in Korean. "The city looks different from up here." Haru didn't respond, but his shoulders shifted slightly, not quite toward her, but no longer actively away. "When I was your age," Mercy continued, switching to English, "I used to look at city lights and pretend each one was a story. That one," she pointed to a cluster of brightness, "that's a family having dinner. And that one is someone reading before bed. And that tiny one way out there, that's someone making a wish." "What are they wishing for?" Haru's question came in careful English, his accent precise. "Maybe the same thing you're wishing for," Mercy said gently. Haru's reflection in the window showed his lip trembling. "I wish my mom would come back." The words hung in the air between them, too large and painful for any response to contain. Mercy didn't try to offer platitudes or false comfort. Instead, she hummed, a low, melodic sound that her own mother had taught her years ago, a Swahili lullaby about the moon watching over children while they slept. Haru turned to look at her, confusion and curiosity mixing in his expression. "What song is that?" "Something my mom taught me. She said some feelings are too big for just one language. The boy considered this, then whispered, I miss my mom in two languages, too. Mercy's throat tightened. She knelt down so they were eye level. That means you loved her twice as much. For the first time since she'd seen him in the restaurant, something in Haru's expression cracked open. His eyes filled with tears he'd been holding back, and his small body began to shake. Without thinking, Mercy opened her arms, and the boy collapsed into them, his face buried against her shoulder as silent sobs racked his frame. She held him there in the vast, cold entrance hall, humming her mother's lullaby and letting him cry until there were no tears left. Mrs. Sato stood at a respectful distance, her own eyes glistening, and from the shadows of an upper gallery, Hisayuki Michi watched the woman who'd appeared in his life like a storm, holding his broken son together with nothing but presence and song. Something shifted in his chest, something he'd thought had died the day he'd buried his wife. When Haru finally pulled back, his face was blotchy and his eyes were red, but he looked lighter somehow, as if crying had released pressure that had been building for months. Will you stay? He asked Mercy in Korean, his voice small and hopeful. Mercy looked at this child who'd lost his mother, at this fortress that pretended to be a home, at the impossible situation she'd stumbled into. Every rational thought in her head screamed that she should leave, should run, should return to her small, safe, invisible life. But she looked at Haru's desperate hope and heard herself say, I'll stay. And somewhere in the shadows, Hisayuki Michi finally allowed himself to breathe. Want to know how this story ends? Subscribe now and comment your location so I can say hello to readers around the world. Dawn broke over the mountain estate in shades of gold and amber, painting the courtyard in soft light that seemed at odds with the fortress's severity. Mercy had been awake for hours, her internal clock still calibrated to the pre-dawn shifts at the Baekdu room. Sleep had been elusive in the guest suite's unfamiliar luxury, the bed too soft, the silence too complete, her mind too full of questions without answers. She'd found the courtyard by accident while exploring the estate's eastern wing, following a corridor that opened onto a space clearly designed for training. The area was enclosed by stone walls on three sides. The fourth opened to the mountain vista below. Smooth stone tiles covered the ground, and wooden practice posts stood at intervals like silent sentinels. Someone used this space regularly. The posts bore marks of repeated impact, and the tiles were worn in specific patterns. Mercy stood in the center of the courtyard, barefoot despite the morning chill, dressed in the plain clothes Mrs. Sato had provided the night before. She closed her eyes and let her breathing settle into the rhythm her father had taught her years ago. 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out, find your center. Everything begins from stillness. Her body remembered even when her mind had tried to forget. She moved through the opening sequence slowly, testing muscles that had gone soft from years of deliberate neglect. The first form was basic: defensive positioning, weight distribution, awareness of surroundings. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. A warrior who cannot stand cannot fight. Everything builds from your foundation. She transitioned into the second form, movements flowing like water. Step, pivot, redirect. Her hands traced patterns in the air, each gesture precise and purposeful. This was the Lion's Guard, her father's signature style, developed over decades of protecting others. It wasn't about aggression or dominance. It was about becoming an immovable shield, about redirecting force rather than meeting it head-on, about protecting the vulnerable while minimizing harm. Mercy lost herself in the meditation of movement, her mind finally quiet after the chaos of the previous night. Sweat began to bead on her forehead despite the cool air. Her muscles protested the unfamiliar demands, but underneath the ache was something that felt like coming home. This was who she'd been before fear had made her small, before she'd learned that visibility meant danger. She was midway through the fourth form when she felt eyes on her. Mercy's hands completed the sequence before she turned, finding Hisayuki Michi standing at the courtyard's entrance. He was dressed more casually than the night before, dark slacks and a gray shirt with sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms marked with the edges of tattoos that disappeared beneath fabric. His hair was slightly damp, as if he'd recently showered, and he held a cup of coffee in one hand. His expression was unreadable, but his posture had changed. He stood differently than he had in the restaurant, less like a businessman and more like someone assessing a potential threat, or perhaps recognizing something unexpected. How long have you been watching? Mercy asked, her breathing still elevated from exertion. Long enough, Hizuyuki replied, his voice carrying easily across the courtyard. He set his coffee cup on a stone ledge and stepped onto the tiles, his movements fluid and controlled. Where did you learn that style? Mercy tensed, old instincts warning her against revealing too much. My father taught me, a long time ago. Your father. Hisayuki circled slowly, maintaining distance but clearly observing her stance, her positioning. What was his name? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Mercy didn't fully understand. She could lie, could deflect, could maintain the walls she'd spent years building. But something in Hisayuki's expression, a mixture of recognition and something that might have been hope, made her answer truthfully. Samuel Bennett. The name landed like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through Hisayuki's carefully controlled composure. His expression cracked for just a moment, revealing something raw underneath. Shock, grief, recognition. He took a step closer, then another, until he stood only a few feet away. Show me the lion's descent, he said quietly. Mercy's breath caught. The lion's descent was the signature move of her father's style, the technique that identified his training as clearly as a signature. Very few people would know its name, and fewer still would recognize it by sight. How do you know about that? She asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. Because Samuel Bennett taught it to me 20 years ago, Hisayuki said. Because he was my mentor, my friend, and the man who saved my life. Because I've been searching for his daughter for a decade. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Mercy's carefully constructed understanding of her past, her father, the absent parent, the man who'd chosen duty over family, began to crumble. You're lying. I'm not. Hisayuki's voice was gentle in a way she hadn't heard from him before. Your father was captain of my personal guard. He trained me, protected me, taught me that strength without honor is just cruelty. 15 years ago, during a coup attempt, he took 3 bullets meant for me. His last words were instructions to find you, to keep you safe, to make sure you knew he loved you more than his own life. Mercy felt her knees weaken. She sank onto one of the stone benches that lined the courtyard, her hands trembling. He left us. He chose this world over his family. He chose to protect his family by protecting me, Hisayuki corrected, moving to sit at a respectful distance on the same bench. Your mother and you received monthly deposits for years. You thought they were government benefits, but they came from me, money Samuel had earned, money I continued to send because I owed him a debt I could never repay. The pieces began to fit together in ways Mercy had never imagined. The mysterious deposits that had kept them housed and fed after her father's death. The way they'd suddenly stopped when she'd turned 18 and changed her name, trying to disappear from a past that hurt too much to remember. Her mother's tight-lipped refusal to speak ill of Samuel, even when young Mercy had raged about his abandonment. Why didn't you find me sooner? The question came out smaller than she'd intended. I tried, Hisayuki said simply. But you vanished. Changed your name, moved constantly, deliberately left no trail. I had people searching, but you'd become very good at being invisible. I was hiding from his life, Mercy whispered, from the violence that killed him. I thought if I could just disappear, I'd be safe. Instead, you walked right back into it the moment you saved my son. There was something almost like amusement in Hisayuki's tone, though his expression remained serious. Samuel would have done the same thing. He never could watch someone vulnerable be hurt, no matter the cost to himself. They sat in silence for a long moment, the morning sun climbing higher and warming the courtyard. Somewhere inside the estate, Mercy could hear the distant sounds of staff beginning their daily routines. A bird called from the forest beyond the walls, its song sharp and clear. Tell me about him, Mercy said finally. My mother died when I was 12. I don't remember his voice anymore. I don't remember what made him laugh. And so Hisayuki told her. He spoke about Samuel Bennett with a respect that bordered on reverence, about his dry sense of humor, his terrible singing voice, his habit of making terrible puns in 3 languages during tense situations. He described training sessions where Samuel would demonstrate a technique once, perfectly, then make Hisayuki repeat it 1,000 times until muscle memory made it instinctive. He shared stories of Samuel talking about his daughter, carrying a photo of young Mercy that he'd look at before sleeping each night. He was planning to retire, Hisayuki said quietly. After the business with the rival faction was resolved, he was going to leave my service and return to you and your mother. He had 6 months left, and then the coup happened, and he made a choice. He chose you, Mercy said, but the bitterness had left her voice. Understanding, painful as it was, had begun to replace the anger she'd carried for so long. He chose to make sure you'd have a father to return to, even if it couldn't be him, Hisayuki corrected. He told me once that protecting people was the only thing he knew how to do well, and if he couldn't protect his own daughter directly, he'd protect the man who could provide for her in his absence. Mercy's throat tightened with tears she'd thought she'd finished crying years ago. I was so angry at him. For so long. He knew you would be. He accepted that as the price of keeping you safe. Hisayuki stood, offering his hand to help Mercy to her feet. Let me show you something. He led her through the estate's corridors to a room she hadn't seen during her brief exploration the previous night. It was a study. Shelves lined with books, a massive desk positioned to overlook the valley, comfortable chairs arranged near a fireplace. But Hisayuki bypassed all of this to stand before a section of wall that held a series of photographs in simple frames. The largest photo showed a younger Hisayuki, perhaps in his early 20s, standing beside a man Mercy recognized with a jolt of painful recognition. Her father, looking exactly as she remembered him, smiled at the camera with his arm around Hisayuki's shoulders. Both wore training clothes and were clearly exhausted, but Samuel's expression held fierce pride. He was more than my mentor, Hisayuki said quietly. He was the closest thing to a father I ever had. My own father was not a kind man. Samuel taught me that strength and cruelty didn't have to be the same thing. Mercy's fingers traced the edge of the frame, not quite touching the glass. Seeing her father's face after so many years felt like reopening a wound and finding it filled with light instead of pain. When I saw you move through his forms this morning, Hisayuki continued, I saw him. The same precision, the same control, the same fundamental principle. Protect first, harm only as necessary. He taught you well. He died before he could finish teaching me, Mercy said. I know the basics, but I never learned the advanced techniques. I was only 11 when he left for what he said would be his last assignment. Then I'll teach you what he taught me, Hisayuki offered. If you're willing. Samuel made me promise to look after you if I ever found you. Teaching you to survive in this world seems like the best way to honor that promise. Before Mercy could respond, quick footsteps echoed in the corridor. Kenji appeared in the doorway, his normally composed expression tight with concern. In his hand was a tablet computer. Sir, we have a situation, Kenji said, his voice carefully controlled. You need to see this. Hisayuki took the tablet, and Mercy watched his expression darken as he read whatever was displayed. He turned the screen so she could see, and her stomach dropped. The video was grainy but clear enough, security camera footage from the Baekdu room, showing Mercy's confrontation with Assemblyman Park from multiple angles. Someone had edited the clips together, added slow-motion sequences highlighting her defensive techniques, and overlaid text in Korean and English. Mystery woman destroys politician in seconds. Who is the Black Lioness? The view count was already in the millions. Comments flooded beneath the video in multiple languages, speculation ranging from martial arts expert to Secret Service to various conspiracy theories. Someone had created a hashtag. News outlets were picking up the story. It went viral 3 hours ago, Kenji reported. Someone leaked the footage, possibly one of the restaurant staff or a patron who filmed it on their phone. We're trying to scrub it, but it's spreading faster than we can contain. How bad? Hisayuki asked, his voice dropping into a tone Mercy hadn't heard before. Cold, calculating, dangerous. Bad, Kenji confirmed. Various factions are trying to identify her. We've already intercepted chatter from at least 2 rival groups discussing whether she represents a new asset in your organization, and there's interest from other parties. The unspoken implication hung heavy in the air. If people knew where to find her, if they could identify her and connect her to the Machi estate, then she'd become a target. And in this world, targets didn't last long. Mercy's mind raced through possibilities, all of them leading to the same conclusion. I should leave. Tonight, if I disappear again, the attention will fade. You can deny any connection, say I was just a random employee who happened to be there. No, Hisayuki's response was immediate and absolute. I'm putting Haru in danger just by being here, Mercy argued, though something in her chest twisted at the thought of leaving. That video has made me visible to exactly the kind of people I've spent years hiding from. You're already in danger, Hisayuki countered. Leaving won't save you. It'll just mean you're alone when they find you. Here you have protection, training, resources. Here you have a chance. He's right, Kenji added reluctantly. At this point, disappearing will look like guilt or fear. Better to own the narrative. You're under Machi protection now. That sends a message to anyone considering making a move. Mercy wanted to argue, but before she could speak, another small voice entered the conversation. Please don't leave. They all turned to find Haru standing in the doorway, still in his pajamas, his dark hair mussed from sleep. His eyes were wide and frightened, and he clutched a stuffed lion that Mercy hadn't seen the night before. I heard talking, Haru said, his voice small. Mrs. Sato said everyone was in the study. Are you leaving because of me? Because I asked you to stay? Mercy's heart broke at the guilt in his expression. She crossed the room and knelt to his level, aware of Hisayuki and Kenji watching, but no longer caring. This has nothing to do with you, she said gently. You didn't do anything wrong. Then why do you want to leave? Haru's lip trembled. Don't you like it here? Did I do something bad? No, sweetheart. You've been perfect. Mercy tucked a strand of hair behind his ear. I'm just worried about keeping you safe. Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices to protect the people they care about. My mom said that, Haru whispered. Before the accident, she said she had to go away to keep me safe, and then she didn't come back. The words landed like a physical blow. Mercy looked up at Hisayuki and saw her own pain reflected in his expression. This child had already lost his mother to the dangers of this world. The thought of making him feel abandoned again was unbearable. I'm not your mother, Mercy said carefully, and I can't promise that everything will be okay, but I promise that if I stay, I will do everything I can to protect you. That's what my father taught me to do, protect people who need protection. Haru considered this with a seriousness far beyond his years. Will you teach me how to protect people like you do? When you're older, Mercy agreed, her throat tight. When you're ready. Does that mean you're staying? Hope blossomed in Haru's expression, fragile but growing. Mercy glanced at Hisayuki, who watched them with an unreadable expression. She thought about her father, about the choice he'd made to protect others, even at the cost of his own life. She thought about spending years hiding, making herself small and invisible, living half a life out of fear. I'm staying, she said, and felt the decision settle into her bones with surprising certainty, at least for now. Haru threw his arms around her neck, the stuffed lion squishing between them. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Over the boy's shoulder, Mercy met Hisayuki's gaze. He nodded once, a gesture of respect and acknowledgement. They would face whatever came next together, the daughter of the lion and the man her father had died protecting, bound by debt and loss and the fragile hope of a child who'd already lost too much. The next 3 days passed in a strange combination of normalcy and tension. Mercy settled into a routine at the estate, spending mornings training with Hisayuki, who proved to be a demanding but patient teacher, and afternoons with Haru, who was slowly beginning to emerge from his shell of grief. The viral video continued to spread, but Hisayuki's people worked to muddy the waters, releasing contradictory information and false leads that made identifying Mercy more difficult. Mrs. Sato proved to be a warm presence in the otherwise austere estate, always appearing with tea or snacks at precisely the right moment. She'd lost her own daughter years ago, she confided to Mercy one afternoon, and seeing Haru smile again brought her joy she'd thought impossible. But underneath the routine, tension built like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Additional security appeared around the estate's perimeter. Kenji's updates to Hisayuki became more frequent and more serious, and Mercy couldn't shake the feeling that they were waiting for something inevitable to arrive. The storm broke on the fourth night, quite literally. Thunder had been rumbling in the distance all evening, and by the time Mercy tucked Haru into bed, a ritual they'd fallen into naturally, Rain was hammering against the windows with enough force to rattle the glass. The boy had been unusually clingy, insisting on 3 stories instead of the usual one, asking questions about her father and her childhood with transparent attempts to delay sleep. "Will you stay until I fall asleep?" Haru asked, his small hand gripping hers. "Of course," Mercy promised, settling into the chair beside his bed. She'd been sitting there for perhaps 20 minutes, listening to Haru's breathing even out into sleep, when the lights went out. Not a flicker or gradual dimming. Instant, complete darkness. Through the window, Mercy could see that the estate's exterior security lights had also died. Only the dim glow of lightning through storm clouds provided any illumination. Her father's training kicked in immediately, flooding her system with controlled adrenaline. She moved to Haru's bedside, her hand on his shoulder, ready to wake him, but not wanting to frighten him unnecessarily. Her other hand found her phone, but it was dead despite being fully charged an hour ago. Some kind of electromagnetic pulse, perhaps, or a sophisticated jamming system. The door to Haru's room opened, and Mercy spun into a defensive position before recognizing Mrs. Sato's silhouette. The older woman moved with surprising speed and silence, carrying what looked like a flashlight that glowed with dim red light. "We need to move," Mrs. Sato said quietly, her usual warmth replaced by military efficiency. "Now." "What's happening?" Mercy asked, already lifting Haru from his bed. The boy woke with a confused murmur, but didn't cry out. "Breach on the eastern perimeter," Mrs. Sato replied, leading them into the corridor with confident strides despite the darkness. "Possibly multiple entry points. Mr. Machi has activated emergency protocols." They moved through hallways. Mercy had walked dozens of times, but in the darkness and silence, they felt alien and threatening. Somewhere in the distance, she heard a sound that might have been gunfire, though the storm made it impossible to be certain. Haru pressed his face against her shoulder, trembling but staying quiet. Mrs. Sato led them to what appeared to be a section of decorative wall panel in the estate's central corridor. She pressed a specific point in the carved design, and the panel slid aside with barely a whisper of sound, revealing a narrow passageway lit by emergency strips of LED lighting. "This leads to the panic room," Mrs. Sato explained, ushering them inside. "It's designed to be invisible to thermal imaging and sound detection. Once you're inside, the door seals automatically. Mr. Machi will come for you when it's safe." "What about you?" Mercy asked, reluctant to leave the woman behind. "I have my own protocols," Mrs. Sato said with a small smile. "Take care of the young master. He needs you." Before Mercy could protest, Mrs. Sato had pressed another hidden button. The panel began to slide closed, sealing them into the passageway. Mercy had no choice but to move forward, following the dimly lit corridor as it descended slightly and curved. The passage was narrow enough that she had to turn sideways in places, but it was well maintained and clearly designed for exactly this purpose. The panic room door stood at the end of the passage, thick steel with a biometric lock that glowed faintly green. Mercy pressed her palm against it, half expecting it not to recognize her, but the lock clicked open immediately. Hisayuki had programmed her access without telling her. The thought settled somewhere warm in her chest despite the fear coursing through her veins. The room beyond was larger than she'd expected, perhaps 15 feet square, with reinforced walls and a ceiling studded with what looked like air filtration systems. One wall held a bank of monitors, currently dark. Another featured a locked weapons cabinet. There were supplies stacked neatly on shelves: water, non-perishable food, medical kits, communications equipment. Mercy sealed the door behind them and finally allowed herself to set Haru down. The boy looked around the room with wide eyes, processing their surroundings with that unsettling maturity that seemed to age him beyond his years. "Are the bad people coming for us?" he asked quietly. Mercy knelt to his level, keeping her voice calm and steady. "Your father has very good security. We're just being extra careful, okay? This is like a super safe hiding spot until everything is okay again. Like hide and seek?" Haru's voice was small, uncertain. "Exactly like hide and seek," Mercy agreed, though her heart ached at having to frame danger as a game. "And you're going to be the very best at staying quiet and still, right?" Haru nodded solemnly. "I can do that. I practiced a lot after Mom died, being quiet." The casual mention of his mother's death, delivered with such matter-of-fact sadness, made Mercy want to weep. Instead, she pulled him close, wrapping her arms around his small frame. "You're very brave," she told him. "Your mom would be proud of you." They settled onto the floor, Mercy keeping Haru tucked against her side. She wanted to turn on the monitors to see what was happening outside their sealed shelter, but she was afraid of what images might frighten the boy. Instead, she did what had worked before. She began to hum, soft and low, the Swahili lullaby that had calmed him on their first night. Time became elastic in the sealed room. It might have been 20 minutes or 2 hours, Mercy's sense of duration distorted by adrenaline and fear. Haru had fallen into a fitful sleep against her shoulder when she finally heard something change. Footsteps in the passage outside. Deliberate, unhurried, but definitely approaching. Mercy's entire body tensed, her mind calculating distances to the weapons cabinet, defensive positions, ways to protect Haru if the door opened to reveal enemies. She carefully shifted the boy aside, positioning herself between him and the door. The biometric lock beeped once, twice, 3 times. Then it clicked open. Hisayuki stood in the doorway, and Mercy felt the tension drain from her body so quickly she nearly collapsed. He was soaked from the rain, his clothes disheveled and his hair in disarray. There was blood on his shirt, not much, and she couldn't tell if it was his, but he moved without difficulty as he stepped into the room and sealed the door behind him. His eyes found Haru first, verifying the boy was unharmed, then shifted to Mercy with an expression that held relief and something deeper, something grateful. "You're both safe," he said, and his voice carried a weight that suggested those words held more significance than their surface meaning. "What happened?" Mercy asked quietly, aware of Haru beginning to stir at the sound of his father's voice. "6 men breached the perimeter during the storm," Hisayuki reported, his tone clinical despite his disheveled appearance. Professional, well-equipped, clearly had inside knowledge of the estate's layout. They were neutralized. The euphemism hung in the air between them. Neutralized meant dead or captured, and either way, it meant Hisayuki had done what was necessary to protect his home and his son. Mercy should have been horrified, should have recoiled from the violence implied in his calm summary. Instead, she felt only relief that he was alive and they were safe. "Dad?" Haru's sleepy voice broke the moment. "Did you win the game?" Hisayuki's expression softened in a way Mercy had rarely seen. He crossed to his son and lifted him into his arms with surprising gentleness. "Yes, the game is over. We won." "Good," Haru mumbled, already drifting back to sleep against his father's shoulder. "Mercy was really good at hiding with me." Over his son's head, Hisayuki met Mercy's gaze. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for keeping him safe, for not running when you could have." "You don't leave family," Mercy replied, echoing the words she'd spoken days ago in a different context. "My father taught me that." Something shifted in Hisayuki's expression. Recognition, respect, and perhaps the beginning of trust. "He taught you well." They stayed in the panic room for another hour, while Kenji and the security team cleared the estate and verified there were no additional threats. When they finally emerged, dawn was breaking over the mountains, painting the storm-washed world in shades of pink and gold. The estate showed signs of the night's violence: broken windows, damage to the eastern wall, scorch marks from what might have been an explosive charge, but it still stood, defiant and solid. Mrs. Sato appeared with dry clothes and tea, as if nothing unusual had occurred, though Mercy noticed the older woman's hands shook slightly as she poured. Haru clung to his father with uncharacteristic neediness, and Hisayuki made no move to discourage it, carrying the boy through the estate as he assessed damage and received reports. Later, after Haru had been fed and settled in front of a movie with strict instructions not to leave Mrs. Sato's sight, Hisayuki found Mercy on the terrace overlooking the valley. She'd showered and changed, but felt bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with physical exertion. "They'll try again," Hisayuki said without preamble, standing beside her at the railing. "Last night was a test. They wanted to see our response time, our defensive capabilities. Now that they know you're here and under my protection, the attacks will escalate." "Then I should leave," Mercy said, though the words felt hollow. "Before Haru gets hurt because of me." "If you leave, you'll be dead within a week," Hisayuki replied bluntly. "These aren't amateurs, and they're not going to stop because you remove yourself from my protection. They want to know who you are, what you represent, whether you're a threat or an asset." The only way to survive is to show them you're neither. You're family. And in this world, family is sacred. Mercy turned to face him fully. I'm not actually family. I'm the daughter of your dead mentor who happened to save your son. That doesn't make me Machi. Hisayuki's expression was unreadable. Actually, it does. Or it will, once the paperwork is finalized. What paperwork? I'm adopting you into the clan registry, Hisayuki said calmly, as if discussing something as mundane as dinner plans. Under Korean-Japanese family law, it's possible to adopt adults in cases of debt repayment or honor-bound obligation. Your father died in my service, saving my life. That debt transfers to his children. By formally adopting you, I fulfill my obligation and grant you the full protection of the Machi name. Mercy stared at him, certain she'd misheard. You can't just decide I'm your family. I can, and I have, Hisayuki replied. The documents are being processed now. Within a week, you'll legally be Machi Mercy, an untouchable heir with full standing in the organization. No one can move against you without triggering a war. You didn't ask me, Mercy said, anger flaring to cover the complicated emotions churning in her chest. I know. Hisayuki met her gaze steadily. And I'm not sorry. Your father asked me to protect you, and this is the only way to ensure that protection holds against the threats you'll face. You can hate me for it if you need to, but you'll be alive to hate me. Mercy wanted to argue, to rage against his high-handed decision, to assert her independence. But she thought about Haru's small hand in hers, about the way Mrs. Sato smiled when she brought them tea, about training in the courtyard while her father's legacy flowed through her movements. She thought about belonging somewhere after years of deliberate isolation. My father would have done the same thing, she finally said. I know, Hisayuki replied. I learned from the best. They stood together in silence, watching the sun climb higher over Seoul. Two people bound by debt and loss and the fragile hope that family could be chosen as well as born. Behind them, through the terrace doors, they could hear Haru's laughter at something in his movie. The sound of a child remembering how to be a child. And for the first time since her father's death, Mercy allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found her way home. Want to know how this story ends? Subscribe now and comment your location so I can say hello to readers around the world. The morning after the attack, Mercy found Hisayuki in his study, standing before the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the valley. The room smelled of coffee and expensive paper, and early sunlight painted everything in shades of amber. He didn't turn when she entered, but his posture shifted slightly, acknowledgement without words. Close the door, he said quietly. Mercy did, a knot of apprehension forming in her chest. Something about his tone suggested this wasn't a casual conversation. She crossed the room to stand beside him, following his gaze out over Seoul's distant skyline. From this height, the city looked deceptively peaceful, its violence and complexity reduced to glittering abstraction. Hisayuki reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope. He held it out to her without speaking, his expression carefully neutral. Mercy took it, her fingers registering the weight and texture, expensive paper, the kind used for important documents. Inside was a passport, the cover dark blue and unfamiliar. She opened it to find her own photo staring back at her, but the name was different. Sarah Miller, American citizen. Beneath the passport were airline tickets, first class to Johannesburg, departing that evening. And a bank card, attached to a note written in Hisayuki's precise handwriting. Account contains enough to start over. No ties, no traces. Mercy's throat tightened. She looked up to find Hisayuki watching her now. His dark eyes unreadable, but his jaw tight. You can leave, he said simply. Tonight. I'll have Kenji drive you to the airport using a route that avoids all surveillance. The passport is flawless. My people are very good at this. The money is clean, untraceable. You could disappear into South Africa or anywhere else you choose. Live quietly, be invisible again. And Haru? Mercy's voice came out rougher than she intended. We'll be protected by the best security I can provide, Hisayuki replied, though something flickered in his expression. Doubt, perhaps, or pain. He'll understand, eventually. Children are resilient. Mercy looked down at the passport again, at the name that wasn't hers, at the promise of safety and anonymity. 3 weeks ago, she would have taken this offer without hesitation. 3 weeks ago, invisibility was all she'd wanted. to disappear so completely that the violence of her father's world could never find her again. But that was before a small boy with ancient eyes had held her hand and called her mom in his sleep. Before she'd stood in a courtyard, moving through her father's forms while the man he died protecting watched with recognition and respect. Before she'd felt the fierce, terrifying joy of belonging somewhere, of mattering to people who mattered to her. "Why now?" she asked. "Why offer me this after everything you said about family and obligation?" Hisayuki was silent for a long moment, his gaze returning to the window. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight she hadn't heard before, something almost like vulnerability. "Because last night, when I cleared the estate and found bodies in the corridors, all I could think was that you and Haru were alone in that panic room. That if they'd gotten past me, if they'd found a way to breach those doors, you would have been the last line of defense. And you would have fought, because that's who you are. And you might have died protecting my son." He turned to face her fully now, and Mercy saw something in his expression that stole her breath. Fear, genuine and unguarded. "I owe your father everything," Hisayuki continued. "He saved my life and asked me to protect you. Instead, I've dragged you into the very danger he died trying to shield you from. So I'm offering you what I should have offered from the beginning, a choice. A real choice with no obligation or manipulation. You can walk away. You should walk away." Mercy looked at the passport in her hands, felt the weight of the tickets and the promise of freedom. She thought about her father, about the choice he'd made to stay and protect, even knowing it might cost him everything. She thought about Haru's smile when she sang to him, about the way Hisayuki's rigid control softened when he watched them together, about Mrs. Sato's warm tea and gentle questions about her day. She thought about family, not the one she'd been born into, but the one she'd found in the most unlikely place. Mercy tore the passport in half. The sound of ripping paper seemed impossibly loud in the quiet study. She tore it again and again until Sarah Miller's face was fragmented beyond recognition. The pieces fluttered to the expensive carpet like snow. The tickets followed, then the bank card, all reduced to confetti at her feet. "You don't leave family behind," Mercy said, her voice steady and certain. "My father taught me that. He stayed and protected you because that's what family does. And now I'm staying to protect Haru and you because that's what family does. I'm not running anymore." Hisayuki stared at her, something complicated and profound shifting in his expression. For a moment, his carefully maintained mask cracked completely, revealing gratitude and relief and something deeper that neither of them was quite ready to name. "You're certain?" he asked quietly. "I'm certain," Mercy replied. "Now stop trying to send me away and teach me how to survive in this world. If I'm staying, I'm not staying helpless." The ghost of a smile touched Hisayuki's lips, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "Your father would be proud." "Then let's make sure I live long enough to deserve that pride," Mercy said. 2 weeks later, Mercy stood in front of a full-length mirror in her guest suite, barely recognizing her own reflection. The hanbok was a masterpiece, deep indigo silk that seemed to shift between blue and purple depending on the light, the traditional Korean cut modified slightly for modern elegance. But what made it extraordinary were the patterns embroidered along the sleeves and hem. Intricate geometric designs, unmistakably African in origin, worked in gold thread that caught the light with every movement. The fusion of her two heritages, made visible and beautiful. Mrs. Sato stood behind her, making final adjustments with the pride of a master craftsman. "You look like a queen," the older woman said softly. "I feel like a target," Mercy admitted, her hands smoothing nervously over the silk. "Good," came Hisayuki's voice from the doorway. "That means you're paying attention." Mercy turned to find him dressed in a charcoal three-piece suit that emphasized his lean build, traditional elements woven subtly into the modern cut. His hair was styled back, and he carried himself with the dangerous grace she'd come to recognize as his preparation for battle, even when that battle took place in a ballroom rather than an alley. "The Viper's Ball," Hisayuki said, offering his arm. "Every major crime family in East Asia will be there. You'll be observed, assessed, and judged. Some will see you as weakness, an outsider elevated beyond her station. Others will see you as a statement, proof that the Machi clan adapts and evolves." "And what do you see?" Mercy asked, taking his arm. I see my mentor's daughter, honoring his legacy, Hisayuki replied. I see someone brave enough to choose danger over safety. I see family. The drive to the venue took 40 minutes, winding through Seoul's glittering districts to a converted palace that managed to look both ancient and modern. Security was everywhere, subtle but omnipresent, watching from shadows and rooftops. The guests arriving were a study in expensive elegance, each one carrying themselves with the particular confidence of people who existed above normal laws. Mercy felt eyes tracking them as they entered, felt the weight of attention settling on her shoulders like a physical thing. Whispers followed their path across the marble floors, speculation, curiosity, judgment. She forced herself to walk with her head high, shoulders back, channeling every lesson her father had taught her about projecting strength even when fear threatened to overwhelm. The ballroom was magnificent, all soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers, traditional architecture updated with modern luxury. Round tables surrounded a central dance floor, and a string quartet played something classical and vaguely menacing. The crowd was predominantly male, predominantly Asian, and universally powerful. These were men who controlled cities and industries, who decided fates with phone calls and hand gestures. Hisayuki guided her through introductions with practiced ease. Yakuza bosses from Tokyo, triad leaders from Hong Kong, Korean gang hierarchs, each one assessed Mercy with varying degrees of interest and skepticism. She met their gazes steadily, responded to their questions with polite brevity, and refused to show the terror singing through her veins. They were midway through the room when a voice cut through the ambient conversation. Machi-san, how unexpected to see you with such interesting company. Takeda emerged from the crowd, impeccably dressed and smiling with perfect politeness that didn't reach his eyes. Mercy had met him briefly at the estate, Hisayuki's second-in-command, a man who managed operations with ruthless efficiency. Something about him had always made her skin crawl, though she couldn't articulate why. Takeda-san, Hisayuki replied with equal politeness. You know Miss Mercy, of course. Indeed. Takeda's gaze raked over her with barely concealed disdain. Though I confess surprise at her presence here, our traditions typically require certain standards for those elevated to family status. The insult was subtle but clear. Mercy felt Hisayuki tense beside her, but before he could respond, she spoke. Traditions evolve, Mercy said calmly, meeting Takeda's eyes without flinching. Or they die. I imagine you understand that better than most, given how far you've risen in the organization. Takeda's smile sharpened. Risen through loyalty and blood, yes, through decades of service and sacrifice, not through a single fortunate accident. My father's sacrifice earned my place here, Mercy replied, her voice low and dangerous. He died saving Machi-san's life. I imagine that's worth more than decades of, what did you call it? Loyalty? The air between them crackled with tension. Around them, conversations had quieted as people sensed conflict brewing. Hisayuki's hand settled on the small of Mercy's back. Support or restraint, she couldn't tell which. Forgive me, Takeda said, though his tone suggested anything but apology. I meant no disrespect to your father's memory, only concern for the organization's future. These are dangerous times. Outsiders bring complications. Then it's fortunate I'm not an outsider anymore, Mercy said. I'm family, legally, formally, permanently, which means any complications I bring are ours to manage together. Subscribe to follow Mercy's journey, and tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from. I love hearing from you all. Takeda's eyes flashed with something cold and calculating. He inclined his head in a gesture that managed to be both respectful and threatening. Of course. Family. He turned to Hisayuki. I hope your confidence in this arrangement proves justified, Oyabun, for all our sakes. He melted back into the crowd, leaving behind a wake of tension. Hisayuki's hand remained on Mercy's back, steady and grounding. Well done, he murmured, but you've just made a dangerous enemy. I think I made that enemy the moment I stepped between a drunk and a child, Mercy replied. At least now he knows I'm not going to apologize for it. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and veiled threats disguised as polite conversation. When the quartet shifted to a slower piece, Hisayuki surprised her by offering his hand. Dance with me, he said. Let them see that you belong here. Mercy allowed herself to be led onto the floor, hyper-aware of every eye tracking their movement. Hisayuki's hand settled at her waist with careful propriety, and they began to move through the steps of a traditional waltz. He led with confident precision, and Mercy followed, grateful for the dancing lessons her mother had insisted on years ago. Takeda will move against us soon, Hisayuki said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. Tonight was a test, seeing how we present as a united front. We passed, but that will only accelerate his timeline. What will he do? Mercy asked, her body responding automatically to his lead. Try to prove I've gone soft. That sentiment has made me weak. He'll target what I care about most. Hisayuki's eyes held hers. He'll target Haru, and you. Then we'll be ready, Mercy said, surprised by her own certainty. We will, Hisayuki agreed. Together. The call came 3 days later, in the dead hours before dawn, when exhaustion made everyone careless. Hisayuki's phone rang with a tone Mercy had never heard before. Urgent, priority, demanding immediate attention. She was in the courtyard, unable to sleep, moving through practice forms to quiet her restless mind. She heard his footsteps before she saw him, and turned to find him already dressed, his face carved from stone. It's a trap, he said without preamble. But I have to go anyway. Mercy's stomach dropped. What happened? Takeda sent word about a weapons shipment coming through Incheon, leverage I need against a rival faction. The timing is too perfect, the information too clean. He's luring me out. Then don't go, Mercy said, though she already knew the answer. If I don't go, I look weak. If I look weak, the organization fractures. People die, including Haru, eventually. Hisayuki's voice was clinical, but his hands were clenched. Kenji will stay here with you and Haru. Maximum security protocols. If I'm not back by dawn, he has instructions. What instructions? To get you and Haru out, to disappear you both so completely that no one will ever find you. Hisayuki met her eyes. I'm sorry. I brought you into this. I should have. Stop, Mercy interrupted. We made this choice together, so whatever happens, we face it together. Something shifted in Hisayuki's expression. Gratitude, affection, something deeper. I'll come back, he said. I promise. But promises, Mercy was learning, meant nothing when made to entropy and violence. The call came 90 minutes later, Kenji's voice tight with barely controlled panic. Mercy-san, we have a situation. Mercy was in Haru's room, having moved there after Hisayuki left, unable to shake the dread coiling in her gut. The boy slept peacefully, unaware of the danger circling their lives. She stepped into the corridor, keeping her voice low. What situation? It's a trap, as Machi-san suspected. He's pinned down at the Incheon shipyard. Takeda orchestrated the whole thing. There's no weapons shipment. It's an execution. Kenji's voice roughened. He's wounded, surrounded. I've dispatched backup, but they won't arrive in time. Mercy's vision tunneled. How wounded? Conscious, mobile, but bleeding. He has maybe an hour before. Kenji didn't finish the sentence. I can't leave Haru. Security protocols mandate I stay here. But someone needs to. Tell me where, Mercy interrupted, her voice cold and certain. Tell me exactly where, and tell me the fastest route. Mercy-san, you can't. My father died protecting him, Mercy said. I'm not letting Hisayuki die alone in a shipyard because I was too afraid to act. Tell me where. Kenji was silent for a heartbeat, then rattled off an address and route with military precision. There's a vehicle in the garage with keys in the ignition. The black SUV. It's armored and fast. Take the coastal highway, avoid the toll roads. And Mercy-san, there are weapons in the console. Use them if you need to. Mercy was already moving, her mind shifting into the cold clarity her father had trained into her. She returned to Haru's room long enough to kiss his forehead and whisper, I'll bring your father home. I promise. Then she ran. The drive was a nightmare of rain and speed, the storm that had been threatening all evening, finally breaking with vindictive force. Mercy pushed the SUV to its limits, hydroplaning through turns, her hands white-knuckled on the wheel. The shipyard emerged from the darkness like a skeletal beast, rusted cranes and stacked containers, all sharp angles and shadows. She parked a quarter-mile away and approached on foot, grateful for the rain that covered the sound of her movement. The weapons in the console had included a simple blade, not elegant, but effective. She gripped it now, letting her father's training guide her movements through the maze of containers. She heard them before she saw them. Takeda's voice, smooth and triumphant, echoing between metal walls. It's nothing personal, Oyabun. You've simply outlived your usefulness. The board agrees. Sentiment has made you weak. Bringing that woman into our organization, elevating her to family status, it proves you're no longer fit to lead. Mercy crept closer, peering around a container to assess the situation. Hisayuki was cornered against a stack of crates, his suit jacket discarded, his shirt dark with blood on one side. He held a blade in one hand, but his movements were careful, conserving energy. Takeda stood back, surrounded by 8 armed men, confident in his numerical advantage. "The board follows strength," Hisayuki replied, his voice steady despite his injury. "And you've just fractured the organization by moving against me. Even if you succeed tonight, you'll spend years fighting civil war." "Then I'll fight it," Takeda said with a shrug. "Better than watching you destroy what we built because you fell in love with a half-breed waitress and a dead man's memory." The slur ignited something cold and furious in Mercy's chest. She assessed the space with tactical precision, containers creating blind spots, rain reducing visibility, Takeda's men positioned too close together, overconfident. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Speed and surprise overcome numbers. Make them react to you." Mercy moved. She came out of the shadows like a ghost, her blade finding the first man's weapon hand before he could react, disarming him with a twist and using his body as a shield against the second man's response. She moved with fluid precision, years of training crystallizing into instinct, each motion economy and purpose. The element of surprise bought her precious seconds. Takeda's formation broke as men turned to face this unexpected threat, and in that moment of confusion, Hisayuki struck. Despite his injury, he moved with lethal grace, his blade finding targets with surgical precision. They fought like they'd trained together for years. Mercy covering Hisayuki's weakened side, Hisayuki compensating for her lack of experience, both of them trusting the other to be where they needed to be. The rain turned the ground slick and treacherous, but it also obscured vision, and Mercy used that to her advantage, appearing and disappearing between containers, striking and melting away. One by one, Takeda's men fell, not dead, but incapacitated, disarmed, neutralized, until finally only Takeda remained, his expensive suit soaked and his confidence shattered. "You," he breathed, staring at Mercy with something like disbelief. "How did you?" "My father taught me," Mercy said simply. "And your biggest mistake was underestimating what family means." Takeda pulled a gun, but his hand was shaking, his aim wild. Hisayuki was faster, his blade flying true, striking the gun from Takeda's hand before the man could fire. The weapon skittered across wet pavement, and Takeda fell to his knees, clutching his injured hand. "It's over," Hisayuki said, his voice carrying absolute authority despite the blood soaking his shirt. "Call off your supporters, dismantle your coup, or I'll let Mercy finish what she started. And trust me, she's her father's daughter. She won't miss." Takeda looked between them, the wounded kingpin and the waitress-turned-warrior, and saw his own defeat reflected in their unified stance. He sagged, broken. Kenji's backup arrived 10 minutes later, finding the scene already secured. They took Takeda into custody, collected his men, and provided first aid to Hisayuki's wound, painful but not life-threatening, as Mercy had prayed during the entire fight. In the back of the SUV, rain still hammering the roof, Hisayuki looked at Mercy with an expression she'd never seen before. Awe, gratitude, something deeper. "You came," he said simply. "You don't leave family behind," Mercy replied, her hands still shaking from adrenaline. "Remember?" Hisayuki reached out, his bloody hand covering hers, and they sat in silence as dawn began to break over the city they'd fought to protect. 3 months later, Mercy stood on the penthouse terrace overlooking Seoul's skyline, watching the city light up as evening settled in. Behind her, through the glass doors, she could hear Haru laughing at something Mrs. Sato had said. The sound so normal and precious, it made her chest ache with gratitude. The shipyard had changed everything. Takeda's coup had been dismantled, his supporters rooted out, the organization restructured with Mercy as a named heir, no longer just protected but elevated to genuine power. The transition hadn't been smooth, but it had been inevitable. When the story spread of how she'd fought beside Hisayuki, had saved his life as her father once had, something shifted in the perception of who she was and what she represented. They called her the mother of the clan now. Not because she was Hisayuki's wife, but because she protected the organization's future with a fierceness that commanded respect. Haru called her mom without hesitation, and she'd stopped correcting him weeks ago. Footsteps announced Hisayuki's presence before his voice did. You're thinking too loud. Mercy smiled, turning to find him healed and whole, his suit replaced by casual clothes that made him look almost human. Just remembering where I was 3 months ago, pouring drinks and trying to be invisible. And now? Hisayuki asked, coming to stand beside her at the railing. Now I'm visible, present, home. Mercy looked up at him. Thank you for seeing me when I was trying to disappear, for giving me a reason to stop hiding. Thank you for saving my son, Hisayuki replied, for saving me, for choosing to stay when leaving would have been safer. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city glow below them. A kingdom rebuilt not on fear but on loyalty, sacrifice, and the family they'd chosen. Behind them, Haru called out asking if they wanted to watch a movie before bedtime. Coming, baby, Mercy called back, then turned to Hisayuki. Ready? He offered his hand, and she took it, and together they walked back inside to the warmth and noise and beautiful chaos of the life they'd built from ashes and courage and love that had been chosen rather than given. The dynasty continued, stronger than before, protected by the Tiger of Ginza and the Lion's daughter, who'd finally stopped running and claimed her place in the world. Keep up with every twist and turn. Subscribe today and see you in the next story.